All right, we are at week 5, ladies and gentlemen. Can you believe it? Week 5 already. And we had some big games last week. We've got more coming up. So let's get it started with the DPS, All Football Talk RodCast. Welcome back to the DPS All Football Talk RodCast. Dan DeSetto, your host. Thank you guys for joining in. We had a lot of fun in week 4. We had a couple of big games and top 25 matchups. Let's throw the top 25 back up here for you, and you can see the big game of the week in Norman. Tennessee rolls into Norman, Oklahoma, and takes out the Sooners. Really strong effort by the Sooner defense, but just not enough offense to overcome a very powerful Tennessee Volunteer team. And the Sooners will have to wait another week to get their first SEC win. They're 0-1 in the SEC. And Tennessee gets the win there, moves into the top 5. Oklahoma drops down to 21. Another big game of the week last week was Illinois. Big win for Illinois, the Illini. Friday night win over the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And we'll still have to wait for that top 25 win from the Nebraska Cornhuskers. We've been waiting a long time for it, and it's not here yet. They seem like a team with that quarterback, Dylan Raiola, that wide receiver, Isaiah Neyor, I think it is Neyor. Good receiver, quarterback combination, good chemistry between those two guys, but just not enough there in Nebraska to get that top 25 win. Nebraska drops out of the top 25. And Northern Illinois takes a loss to Buffalo, and it drops them out of the top 25. So welcome to the top 25, the Provo gang, the BYU Cougars, in at number 22, along with the Boise State Broncos at number 25. They're sneaking into the polls this week. Another big win was Utah, who now moves up to number 10 in the country with a strong win against Oklahoma State that was better than what the final score indicated. It was 22-3, middle of the fourth quarter, and it wound up 22-19 with a furious comeback from Oklahoma State. Big win there. Another big win in the top 25 was Michigan, the Wolverines. Congrats to the defending champs. Strong victory there, big first half, and then a big comeback by USC out of the halftime adjustments. USC gets it rolling, gets some big plays, and finally succumbs at the end to a 90-yard drive from Michigan. Michigan punches it in. The dogs are barking. Michigan takes the win there in the big house. And 12-13 are those teams now in the polls. So lots of fun, and we got more fun coming this week. Biggest game of which is Georgia rolling in to Tuscaloosa to take on Alabama in a game where Alabama might wind up being the underdog at home for the first time in a very long time. So, big win by my Clemson Tigers, by the way, thumping on North Carolina State, so they move up a tiny bit. And, of course, number 1 Texas holds the top spot, completely dominating Louisiana Monroe. So, Another notable one was the University of Miami with a resounding win against the USF Bulls. They move up to number 7. That's your top 25 roundup for last week. What do I want to talk about today? Since it's early in the season, we don't have a lot of data, right? If you follow this RodCast, if you don't follow it, I thank you. I welcome you to this podcast. I call it the RodCast because I have a computer selector called Rodney. He's I affectionately call my computer picker Rodney because he gets no respect, and that's okay. He's got to earn it. So, Rodney, completely all of our selections that we make, our betting plays, are all based on push a button, and Rodney tells me what to pick. I don't do any human judgment. You won't get me looking at the depth charts in this podcast and saying that third-string quarterback is better than that second-string quarterback, and that third-string tackle's out, and that first-string wide receiver is better than the cornerback he's playing. There's plenty of podcasts where you get that. Mine's pure data. What does the data tell us? This is for data geeks, nerds, I guess this is more for data nerds. And the funny thing is, in the early part of the season, it can be very confusing what the data tells you, because what you don't have in the early part of the season is the outliers are not getting averaged out, and you could have an outlier having too much of an impact on early season data. And so what I like to look at in the early part of the season is, where is Rodney correct with his rankings, and where is he telling a truth? And where is he telling us a lie, right? So which teams is he being truthful about how good they are, and which teams is he telling lies about? So one of the biggest things we use is our GSA metric. It's our own concocted formulas for a adjusted efficiency metric. It's called the GSA, Game Statistical Assessment. It's a grading system that I use for every performance that a team puts out. Grade them all season long, average them, do all that stuff, get your standard deviations and all that good stuff, and figure out who's better than who and make my predictions based on that. The GSA is telling me certain things about teams early in the season that could be truths and could be lies. So let's get into that. The truths and the lies at week number 4, after week 4's data and entering into week 5. So first thing, average GSA. We talked about that. That's an average grade. Some teams, and remember, we don't use FCS data here. We're using only FBS games. So some teams only have 2 data points, right? They've only played 2 games at this point. Every FBS team has at least played 2 games against FBS competition by now. But some teams have only played 2 games. Some have played 3, and a few have played 4. Like Florida State's played 4, right? Georgia Tech's played 4, right? So some teams have more data than others, and so there's some truths and some lies. And one of the truths that has happened every year since I've been doing this collection and doing my GSAs, everyone knows, 2011, I say it every week, started in 2011, keeping the data that I was collecting and the GSAs and all of that good stuff. Since then, every year, at the end of the regular season, every championship team has been ranked either number 1, number 2, or in one case, number 3 in the average GSA metric for all of FBS. 130 plus teams, whatever, they're number 1, number 2, or number 3. And that GSA metric doesn't have any magic in it. It's simply adjusted efficiency. That's it. Nothing else. I don't have a committee that looks at the data and goes, we can't put that data out because someone will say you don't know what you're talking about there. So let's move them down. Let's move them up. None of that. If the data looks silly, the data looks silly early. I don't care. I don't have sponsors and, all that. So if the data looks silly, the data looks silly. And in some cases it looks silly, and I'm going to tell you why right now. Who's number 1, number 2, number 3? It looks like a truth maybe, right? Miami. Number 1, Georgia. Number 2, Texas. Number 3, is your eventual national champion going to be one of those 3 teams? It's conceivable. It's not inconceivable like that movie says, right? Like The Princess Bride, right? It's not inconceivable that your champion could be one of those 3 teams. That could be a truth, right? That could be a truth. However, could it also be a lie? Miami, we've been waiting for them every year. Miami's number 1 right now. We've been waiting for them every year to be back. Is Miami really back? Is that a lie? So I got Miami in the truth section and the lie section. Is it a lie? We'll see. They get into ACC competition coming up. We'll see what happens. Ohio State, your Buckeyes. I've got it highlighted there. Wait a minute. Ohio State is ranked where in the average GSA? After 4 weeks of data, Ohio State is number 25 in the country. What? Is it a truth? Is it a lie? Is it a truth that Ohio State's not as strong as maybe we think they are? We'll see. Is it a lie that Penn State is number 27? Might be a lie. We'll see. Is Penn State really not a top 25 team? We'll see. I think I've got them in the lie category. I think those are lies that the early season average GSA is telling us right now. There's a few more lies I'm going to tell you about here in just a minute when we finish this, and some notes I took that are probably going to wind up being lies. We'll go over those in a minute. DPS tiers. Tiers is a little bit different than average GSA. It's a little more in-depth. The tiers that you're going to see starting next week, those tiers are Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Those are your grading, your sigmas of your grading curve, right? So your GSA, your grading curve, you get A pluses, A's, B pluses, B's, C pluses, C's, right? You get these different tiers, right? When you grade everybody. Tier 1 currently is UGA, the Georgia Bulldogs, and Texas. Tier 1. And the difference between the tiers and the GSA, the tiers is a little bit different in the fact that tiers assigns weighting to the things that former champions are things that former champions do well, right? Statistical factors that former champions do well, whereas the average GSA is like all stats, whether they're important as a championship team or not is different. And so that's the difference between the GSA and the tiers. But not only is Georgia 2 and 3, Georgia and Texas 2 and 3 in the average GSA, they're also Tier 1. So they do the important things right. But look who's Tier 2. UCF, the Knights. The UCF Knights are Tier 2. Do you believe that? Is that a truth? Is that a lie? The Iowa State Cyclones are Tier 2. Is that a truth or is that a lie? We'll find out coming up. I think it's a lie. We'll see. Tier 3, Ohio State. Last year, we had the first tiers that I put out was in Week 5, next week. After the Week 5 games are played, we put out our first tiers of the year. And Georgia was Tier 5. Tier 5 after 5 weeks of data. They were Tier 5. That's terrible, right? They wound up climbing their way up as expected. They climbed their way up. but no team has ever won a national championship who was outside of tier number 3 by week number 5. So Georgia climbed their way up, didn't win a national title last year. So that streak continues. No team has ever come from outside of tier 3 by week 5 and gone on to win a national title. Maybe that changes this year. Now that we've got a 12-team playoff, we shall see. But right now, Ohio State is hanging in there in tier 3, but Penn State is outside of the championship tier. And so that's your tiers right there. And so those are some of the early truths and lies of the DPS. Here's some other ones. The championship projection. So if you project how good all the teams are in all the conferences based only on their current average GSA. And it will change over time. But if you just use the ones that are there today, the best 2 teams in the ACC are Miami and Louisville. They're due to meet. Just remember, this has nothing to do with schedule. This is just their grading of the games that they've played so far. Miami and Louisville, that seems like it might be a truth and a projection that makes sense, right? Miami playing Louisville in the ACC championship. Georgia and Texas, that might be a truth, right? They might be the 2 best teams in the SEC and might wind up playing in the championship. I think Ole Miss and Tennessee, perhaps Alabama, maybe Missouri, have something to say about that. But that's the prediction based on current GSA strength. Georgia, Texas. So I put those down as truths. Big 12 championship, I put these down as lies. Iowa State versus UCF. Wow, yeah, the 2 best teams as far as average GSA in the Big 12 currently, Iowa State and UCF. And look at the Big 10 championship. How hilarious would that be? A rematch of the Pac-12 championship from last year in the Big 10 championship this year. How hilarious would that be? I think that's going to be a lie as well. Currently, Washington beats out Michigan by that much, just a tiny bit, as the second best team in average GSA in the Big 10 behind Oregon. So despite Oregon's struggles with Boise State earlier and their struggles earlier with FCS Idaho, which we don't count. That game wasn't even counted. And Washington already has a loss. Those 2 teams are still number 1 and number 2 in the Big 10 in average GSA. I think that will also be a lie. I think it's going to be Ohio State and someone else, maybe Oregon. But Ohio State will probably climb their way up and get in the championship. And early season data, how ironic would this be, the thing I highlight? Washington State, Wazoo, the Cougs. Wazoo. Are you kidding me? So I thought, the team I thought would take a bid from either the ACC or the SEC or the Big 12 would be Notre Dame. But it looks like right now it might be Washington State. So is that a truth or is that a lie? Washington State currently sits, get this, number 3 offense in the country right now, the Washington State Cougs. Is that a truth? Is that a lie? We have this thing called an overall ranking, which, we have the GSA ranking, we have the tiers, and we also have an overall ranking. Overall ranking is Rodney's way of trying to make a human ranking, which is a combination of statistical, like deserving, most deserving, and best, right? So it is a combination of how the humans might vote, right? And that ranking towards the end of the year starts to look a lot like what the humans say, right? But in the early part of the season, Wazoo's number 2 in the overall ranking. So yeah, is that a truth? Is that a lie? Wouldn't that be hilarious? I think it's definitely a lie. They almost lost to San Jose State last week. I don't think Washington State will stay as high up as where they are in the rankings. So that is the truth and lies of Week 5. All right, let's move on to review of Week 4's performance from Rodney, our computer play engine, right? So here we go for the top 25 matchups from last week. And look at that, 4-0. 4-0 Rodney was. And also he predicted the outright win by Illinois. He did not predict an outright win by Michigan. He just predicted them to cover. But he predicted the outright win for Illinois as one of his upset specials of the week. Illinois gets the win. Michigan gets the cover and also the win. He didn't play that. Utah gets barely after the comeback late by Oklahoma State by 1 point. Utah gets the cover against Oklahoma State as a favorite, and Tennessee as a favorite gets the 10-point win against Oklahoma and covers that 7-point spread. Ladies and gentlemen, 4-0 for Rodney in the top 25 matchups. Finally a good week, and he is now 7-4, 63.6% on his top 25 matchup predictions right now. Good week for Rodney. The 2 with the check mark are actual DPS plays as well, so I actually won real money on those picks. Here, speaking of plays, here are the plays from last week. 4-3. Unfortunately, because of juice, only 0.64 up for the week, but an up, we will take it because we need it. As you can see, for the year, we're down 10 units already because we had a money line disaster last week. Tennessee and Utah, you already heard about that. Tulsa gets the win. Michigan State does not get the win, but covers the 7 points against Boston College. Painful loss for me from Rodney's selection of Baylor to cover +2 against Colorado. Painful right there. Having the Hail Mary at home for Colorado. Painful loss right there. Lost a play on that one. Was happy to see my Tigers hang on for the cover, the 20.5-point cover. I get a loss on that one. I'm quite okay with that. And the other one, the last one, Arkansas State, we were never really in the game on that one. Take the loss there. 12-20 so far this year, 37.5% on plays. We got to pick it up in the coming weeks. And then for the money line, we already talked about the money line, 0-3. So I didn't used to play, these are supposed to be sprinkles, money line sprinkles. These are underdog predictions. They're all underdogs. They're all plus money underdogs. And these are sprinkles. You put less than a unit on these just for, sprinkles. But I was finding that each week I was winning 1 or 2 of these each week, even though I didn't win last year. Even though I didn't win any of the parlays, I would win 1 or 2. So I said, let me put a full unit on all of these this year. Started putting a full unit on them and won a couple. Had positive weeks, first 2 weeks, negative weeks the next 2 weeks. And I'm, for the year so far, down a half a unit, 0.56 on the money line upset plays. 0-3. Including the double overtime loss that would have been a plus 400 winner for me. One of the other ones, I think it was New Mexico State, wasn't close. The plus 570. But I believe the Ball State Central Michigan was a close game. We took the loss in that one. Close loss there on that one. So 0-3. And for the year, we're down 0.4 units for the parlays. And for the money line sprinkles, 5-7, half a unit down on the money line for this year. So as I said, overall for the year, down 10 units, and we'd hope to pick it up in week 5. So let's talk about week 5. All right, we're back for part 2, talking about week 5 matchups now. So here are the AP top 25 matchups. There's 4 of them this week. We're starting to get into some better games. As the season rolls along here. So we got 4 of these matchups. Kansas State hosts Oklahoma State, coming off that big loss that Oklahoma State had. Both teams coming off a big loss. Kansas State thumped by BYU last week. Oklahoma State was worked over pretty well by Utah, and Kansas State is favored in this contest at home, and Rodney's got Kansas State taking this win and covering the 5 points. Not sure I agree, but who knows what you get with Oklahoma State. They're so up and down. In South Bend, Notre Dame hosts Louisville. Rodney says take Notre Dame, lay the points, lay the 6, and take Notre Dame in this one. I think a lot of the money's going on Louisville on this one. This spread, we might expect it to be lower by the end of the week here in Notre Dame's favor. Georgia and Alabama. This one is an actual play this week for me. As you can see by the green check mark, Alabama is going to be an underdog most likely when the spread closes. Right now it's at -2 on Georgia. Georgia's the favorite. And Alabama's going to be an underdog for the first time in many, many years. It's the 90s, I believe, sometime in the 90s. An underdog at home. So Georgia. Somehow Rodney thinks Georgia's going to get that win and cover the 2 points. So lay the 2. Take Georgia in that one. And Illinois at Penn State, that is a gigantic number for Penn State to cover. And Rodney says Penn State will cover it. I'm definitely nervous about that one. Last week, 4-0 on Rodney's top 25 matchup predictions. This week, I don't think so. But we'll see. 7-4 overall, 63.6% on the AP top 25 matchups. How about the play? So we've got the ATS and the money line plays now for week 5. I kind of have been experimenting with a couple of different strategies early in the season to try to get better in the early part of the season when Rodney doesn't have a lot of data. Because as you remember, I only use data. I've mentioned that a few times already in this RodCast. But those strategies have kind of backfired on me. So hoping to go back to original strategy of DPS upset predictions only. And so here we are. These are the plays for the week. We already talked about Georgia and Alabama. North Carolina coming off the drubbing that they took against James Madison. 2.5-point underdogs against Duke. And Rodney says North Carolina gets up off the mat and covers the 2.5 and wins that game, or keeps it within a point, 2 points. Louisiana against Wake Forest. ACC Wake Forest, one of the worst Power 5 teams this year. Great coach, not a good team. NIL taking the hits against Wake Forest here. So Louisiana, Lafayette covers the +3 as underdogs Take Louisiana and the points. BYU against Baylor. BYU off the big win last week. Baylor off the disappointing Hail Mary loss to Colorado. Rodney says take BYU and the 3 points here. And Washington and Rutgers. That's an interesting one. Rodney is really high on Washington, as we talked about earlier. So far, not sure exactly why. He says they're running the ball with power this year, and he likes that. So Washington +3 against Rutgers. And as you can see by the asterisk next to Duke, that means this game is also included in our 3-dog parlay, which you will see next. So here's the 3 underdog parlay. As you know, last week we went 0-3 on our moneyline upset plays. Here's the 3 we've got for this week. North Carolina and Duke, we already talked about. That's a +111. So I either take a double loss on this one because I have the moneyline play as well and the ATS play. I take a double loss, or I win back some money and the juice, the $10 juice. So we will see what happens here if I either get a double win or a double loss on that North Carolina Duke game. So UTSA, they've struggled hard this year. ECU look like they're kind of improved, but Rodney says take UTSA to defeat outright ECU +155. And this last game I absolutely hate, right? Purdue gave up 66 to Notre Dame. How in the world can they beat outright as a 10-point underdog Nebraska? But, I'm all about the process and all about honesty in the process. And the honesty says, my process is the biggest underdog of the week. I have to play that in my moneyline upset parlay. The biggest point spread underdog that Rodney predicts to outright win has to be part of my parlay. And so this Purdue and Nebraska game has to be part of my parlay. That is a +310 if Purdue somehow gets a win against Dylan Raiola, Matt Rule, and the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Yikes. So that's the process that I have lived by, and that's what I'm going to continue to live by. The biggest underdog of the week that Rodney predicts as an upset is always going to be in my play, and that's Purdue versus Nebraska. So that's it for this week. That's the RodCast for week 5. Thank you guys for listening. Thanks for subscribing, commenting, listening, everything else. We really appreciate it. Let's hope for some better things. We're down 10 units already for the year. Let's make a comeback, and we will see you next week. We will have our first look at the DPS tiers for this year. And remember, tier 1, 2, and 3 is where you got to be if you want to win the national championship. So we'll see who's in there next week. Dan DeSetto for the DPS All Football Talk RodCast, and we'll see you next week.